Today's video is sponsored by Current. While it sometimes seems to go by in a blink, the NFL season runs for half the year, every year, almost without fail. But as I sit here watching this 4-second OTA clip for the 17th time, I can't help but ask this one question. Can we please get some football during the other 6 months? Now, if you're a basketball, baseball, or even a hockey fan, you may feel that 6 months of football, hey, that's good enough. But like Hall of Fame linebacker Ray Lewis once tweeted, we should never be comfortable with just good enough. Last year I had a great time covering the XFL's run. It was entertaining, refreshing in many ways, and then it was over. The pandemic hit them mid-season, and for a league just trying to get through their first year, it was basically a death blow. But like any good villain, the league did not actually die. They instead just went into their third and fourth transformation that pretty much came out of nowhere. They started off as an anything goes league looking to capture that WWE energy back in the early 2000s. They only lasted one season, but in 2017, they began their first resurrection. Unfortunately for them, they get wiped out by the pandemic. Can't really plan for that. Re-entered Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, only this time, he's not just there to warm up the crowd, he's there to offer stability, be the foundation, aka the Rock of the league. He and his business partner slash ex-wife Danny Garcia purchased a league that's already failed twice. But this cat right here with the raised eyebrow, yeah, he seems to be the living embodiment of King Midas, as everything he touches turns into gold. But before they ever had a chance to spring into action, the XFL undergoes yet another transformation, this time merging with the CFL. Now, the terms of this quote-unquote merger hasn't been fully fleshed out to the public, and it may actually be more of an alliance than a true merger. Still, it looks to be the XFL's strongest form yet. But as you'd expect with any good narrative, they're gonna need every little drop of that strength they can muster, because a new contender for the Spring Football Championship belt just cued their intro music. The USFL has announced plans to return in 2022. Same year the XFL was originally set to come back for the third time. Now, the USFL hasn't been around since the late 1980s, but their one iteration lasted 3 full seasons, meaning the USFL, which hasn't been around for 30 years, still has more successful seasons under its belt than the AAF and every version of the XFL combined. And they're honestly the only league to ever truly compete with the NFL. Today we take a break from the what happened to's and instead dive head first into what I'm calling Spring Football Wars, mostly just for dramatic effect, let's be real. But it should be a fun ride. We got some history and some news all wrapped up in a nice narrative. So if you knew, we're closing in on 800,000 subscribers, so you know what I'm saying, click the subscribe button, enable your notifications, check out the merch is underneath the video. But other than that, you already know what time it is, man. Cue the Wayne. Okay, real quick before we jump in, I gotta give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor, Current. Alright, so simply put, Current is a mobile bank. This is not a prepaid card. This is a way to manage your money that is suited for the times that we're in. It's all mobile. With this card, you get a bunch of nice perks. For one, you can actually get your paycheck up to 2 days early. That bill ended up hitting a couple of days before your check is set to come. This is a great option. Also, you have even more of a backup, as the card does have up to $100 in overdraft protection. They call it the future of banking because, like many things in today's world, it's been simplified and updated to be more efficient, actually having the customer in mind. You can send and receive money easily. Plus, it works on Apple Pay, Google Pay, Venmo, Cash App, everything. Also, you can deposit your checks using the camera on your phone, and there's no hidden fees or minimum balance requirements. So click the link in the description and grab a Current card today. Shout out to Current once again for sponsoring. Without further ado, let's get it.
Flush comes up, shows blitz, and he's coming. Heats on, Abear gets it away, Carter's there, first down, he's going for the corner, touchdown! Woo!
On July 17, 1983, the USFL had their first championship game. They got an absolute dream scenario when league MVP Bobby Abear threw a late fourth quarter touchdown to Anthony Carter, sealing a victory. At the time, this game was actually said to be more entertaining than the NFL's recent Super Bowls. Now, in the intro I said, the USFL was the only American football league to ever truly compete with the NFL. That was not hyperbole. Every year, the USFL would hold their own draft, completely ignoring what the NFL was doing. They just draft the best players who, more often than not, would still choose to play in the NFL. But they did manage to poach a couple of big names. In 1985, they made then collegiate star Doug Flutie the highest paid player in any sport at the time, all just to keep him from going to the NFL. In 1984, Jim Kelly was literally sitting in a face-to-face meeting with the Buffalo Bills after they drafted him in the first round. He gets a phone call and it's Bruce Allen, GM of the USFL Chicago Blitz. Dude persuades Jim to leave that meeting and he eventually signs with the USFL. Now, Jim Kelly still didn't sign with the Chicago Blitz. He instead signed with the Houston Gamblers. His whole thing was he didn't want to play in cold weather, which is why he didn't want to go to the Buffalo Bills in the first place. So he wasn't going to turn that down and then go to a Chicago team. The USFL allowed him to choose whatever team he wanted. He picked Houston. Yeah, it's hot down here. The USFL even signed Steve Young to the LA Express right out of college. But the owner of the Express got raided by the FBI in the middle of the season. Turned out his bread wasn't quite as long as he had made it out to be, and the LA Express basically went bankrupt. But their biggest signing actually came during the league's very first season. These dudes struck gold when they signed Herschel Walker. They got this man fresh out of college, straight off a Heisman season, all because he was still too young to play in the NFL at the time. He needed somewhere to play and decided to get paid in the USFL versus coming back for that dreaded college senior season, which for a player of his caliber has little to no upside. The Cowboys actually bet on the USFL's failure and drafted Herschel in the 5th round of the '85 draft, despite the fact that dude was still playing in the USFL. That way, if the USFL ever folded, the Cowboys would still get their guy. 1 year later, Jerry's wishes came true. But the startup league's downfall had actually been in the works for a couple of years at that point. The funny thing about quotes is that even when intentionally misinterpreted, they sound hella wise when they line up well with the point that you're trying to make. But of course, you can just as easily find examples where the advice in the quote doesn't work. And guess what? The USFL's downfall is one of those cases. See, contrary to Ray's advice, the USFL had spring football sold up, and in hindsight, they probably should have just been comfortable with good enough. Had they done that, they'd probably still be thriving today. A more applicable sports cliche in this slide: be a star in your role. The USFL should have just been cool with being the best they could possibly be in their role. Here's what I mean. Instead of just dominating spring football and likely still being around today, the USFL was like, nah, bruh, we want the fall. We coming for it all. We want all the smoke. We taking on the NFL head up. In 1984, the USFL started discussing a possible move to the fall. Some of the owners were dead set against this as it went against their original business strategy. But owners like Eddie Einthorn and Donald Trump felt they could aggressively move to the fall and force a merger with the NFL, doubling the worth of their USFL franchises in the process. They completely ignored the urging from some of the longer tenured owners and even the consulting firm that they had hired. After doing a good job of tapping into the greed of all the other owners, they eventually got the majority vote and the process of moving their season to the fall began. And they did this despite the fact that the league was doing well in the spring. They even had to leave several TV contracts on the table in order to begin the facilitation of their move to the fall. There had to be a more efficient way to say that. That was a lot of words. But there's no way these cats ever got to where they were financially without employing the one useful strategy that I learned in college: CYA, cover your ass. In order to adhere to the rules of CYA, many of the owners were hatching their own plans of survival in the midst of this risky move. Teams like the Pittsburgh Maulers knew they couldn't compete with the Steelers in Pittsburgh, so they just folded. Within literally just a few weeks, that one decision forced the USFL to abandon 4 lucrative markets, cancel a move to a 5th market, and suspend operations in a sixth market. This alone put the USFL in a very precarious situation, damaging their league damn near beyond repair. But if the move to the fall would have ended up being successful, this huge gamble would have all been worth it. In order to kill multiple birds with one stone, the USFL decided to file an antitrust lawsuit against the NFL, saying they had a monopoly on TV broadcasting rights. They said the NFL had bullied ABC, CBS, and NBC into not televising the USFL games in the fall. By the end of it, the jury did find the NFL guilty of having a de facto monopoly, but they rejected the claims that the NFL tried to bully networks into not carrying the USFL. What they found instead is kind of hilarious, as the jury felt the USFL's own mismanagement was actually the thing hindering them most. The USFL was seeking damages of $567 million, which would triple under the antitrust law, so we talking $1.7 billion. Pretty nice nest egg to be able to run a league, especially back in the late 80s. And the jury did decide to award them a small portion of that. A hilariously small portion. They awarded these people $1. And when you triple that, you can't even buy a triple at a burger spot. The USFL had basically bet the future of their league on successfully moving to the fall and winning this case. Neither of those things came to fruition, and eventually they lost their league. Long story short, after 3 years, the USFL was looking like a mainstay in that spring football spot. Honestly, if they never try to take on the NFL, there's a very good chance they have a fully fleshed out league running every single spring that have been going on for the last 30 plus years. But instead of doing the absolute most with their smaller slice of the pie, they basically end up with nothing. This brings us to present day. Since the USFL's collapse, there have been several leagues like the AAF and the XFL who've attempted to claim the vacant spring football market. One that kind of goes under the radar is the actual Spring League, which is more of a developmental league that gives players pro-level coaching and the opportunity to be scouted by pro leagues. But the Spring League's definition of pay to play is a little bit different than most. While this sometimes doesn't apply to hand-picked players, everyone else literally has to pay in order to play in this league. And to be fair, this is just a registration fee, but that thing could be a couple $1,000s in most cases. Their business model is completely different, and instead of having to dump out large sums of money to players, it's basically the players themselves who are funding the league. And thanks to that, the Spring League has been doing pretty well. Starting out as basically a glorified camp in 2017 to actually signing their very own TV deal with Fox in late 2020. So now not only are they not having to pay players, not only are the players having to pay them a little bit just to play, but they're also getting TV money on top of that. The Spring League is in an interesting spot because the owner of that league is also the co-owner of this league. That's right, the new USFL is co-owned by the founder of the Spring League. And when the return of the USFL was announced, they also announced a new TV deal with, you guessed it, Fox Sports. What does that mean for the Spring League itself, since Big Brother USFL is coming in to kind of take over that TV slot, I'm assuming? Basically, only time will tell. One thing that it likely does mean is that the Spring League can now serve as a developmental / feeder league for the USFL, and the fact that it's partially owned by the same person, that should make transactions between the two leagues pretty damn painless. I think it's a brilliant move by Spring League founder and co-USFL owner Brian Woods, as he and Fox Sports seem to be testing out the TV viewership with the Spring League, and it's said to be averaging around 400,000 views per week, which is pretty damn solid considering it's spring football. There's no big names, no real marketing, and they don't even have localized teams. Slide a 10-team league with a few more notable names that you've at least heard of, a bigger marketing budget, and hometown fans into that same TV slot, and you might just have something.
If you smell what the XFL is cooking.
Now, the XFL may be in even more trouble than before, as many people believe not even The Rock can save the league if they can't get back up and running right away. It's been reported that the XFL may not make it back onto the field until 2023. And if they get beat to the market by the USFL, there's a pretty good chance that the XFL never actually gets back off the ground. Now, to be fair, the XFL was in a very similar situation back in 2019 when the AAF rushed to beat the XFL to the market. But luckily for the XFL, the AAF league folded after just that one season. The USFL seems to be a little bit more stable than that, as they already have their kind of test league, the spring league, which has been running for the last 3-4 years. But you never know what'll happen with these startup leagues. It could literally be announced that it's shutting down tomorrow, and I would not be shocked. Now, the best thing the XFL has going for it besides its superstar owner is its relationship with the CFL. Only problem is their relationship status is complicated, or maybe it isn't, but that's the thing. Nobody really knows what their relationship even is. All we know is that they've had discussion, but as of now, nothing else has been reported or even leaked when it comes to the nature of their relationship. So while there's technically 3, I kind of think this is a good way to look at it. We currently have 2 spring football leagues that are set to compete with each other, the XFL versus the USFL/Spring League. But if a single spring football league with no direct competition hasn't actually worked since the 80s, what happens when there's 2 leagues competing for the same small niche fan base, the same pool of players, the same broadcasting rights? If only one can survive, who would it be? I'll admit, I'm partial to the XFL. I really enjoyed the league. I loved my time covering it in early 2020, and players like PJ Walker really won me over with their play on the field. But PJ and tons of other standout XFL players are now in the NFL, and the USFL's connection with the Spring League, their ability to beat the XFL back to the market, and the fact that Fox Sports, their broadcasting station, actually owns equity in their company. I'd say those few things definitely give the USFL a leg up. You know, it's funny, the XFL once worked with the Spring League a few years back, helping the Spring League to get a little bit more exposure. Given that information, the solution to this whole thing seems to be pretty simple. The XFL and the USFL should merge. The XFL's 8 teams can go and join with the USFL's minimum of 8 teams, have a 16-team league, dominate the spring, and boom, we good to go. Now we got an A1 spring football league with at least 16 teams. The spring league can still serve as a feeder league / developmental league for the larger merger league that we now have, and any US based player who does not make it to the NFL now has a really great option to fall back on and still make a solid living playing ball. But sometimes it doesn't work like that. Sometimes idols become rivals and would-be partners become your biggest competition. And it's kind of cold-blooded, but if we're being real, at the end of the day, in spring football wars, anything goes.